Welcome to another episode of the Carry Trainer Higher Line podcast. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Higher Line podcast. I've been wanting to do this one for a while. I've got a friend with me, Andrew Thomas. Thank you for coming. He's with Collision Analytics. I met you, maybe 10 years ago?
Yeah, it's been a while.
You're a copper,
Yes, I was. Spent 15 years in law enforcement.
And now you are an expert in reconstructing accident scenes.
Yes.
So I want to talk about that. I also want to talk to people, because I bet you know, if you can reconstruct a scene, you probably know what led up to it and why it happened.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can talk with people how not to end up in one of your investigations.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So tell me a little bit about yourself. Long walks on the beach and all that.
Yeah. No, keeping very busy. So Collision Analytics started up in 2017. And I started it with the plan of being able to jump out of law enforcement eventually, retire into, sort of have a plan to for the family to not have to be a lifer in the industry, at least in law enforcement. And it's taken off, and I had the opportunity to jump out about my 15-year mark with law enforcement. I spent 15 years with a large sheriff's office northwest of Chicagoland, and really learned, tons of hands-on experience with crashes and calls and investigations. And
you've investigated like over 200 crashes?
200 major incident fatality crashes. So
okay.
Hundreds more of those that are your run-of-the-mill crashes. Yeah. 200
that were like, what makes it major? Somebody died?
Yeah, so basically our team activation. So if there's a likeliness of death or great bodily harm or sort of or a really odd situation where you need the specialty, investigative analysis side of things, then our team would get activated and we would go spend time just sort of picking it apart and understanding the details of it.
Why, or rather, who says we got to send a group of people out to figure this out? Why not just those idiots hit each other and clean up the mess so traffic can keep moving?
Yeah, during my instruction, I teach this topic as well throughout the country, and I tell PDs throughout the nation. Oftentimes the challenge is, chiefs or heads of departments will say, that's the insurance office's job. We don't need to do that. If it's a traffic ticket or whatever, get the ticket issued and move on. The challenge with that, though, is if someone lost their life, if a child was involved and they're seriously injured, it's really sort of I see it as our duty as law enforcement to give them a picture of what occurred in the last minutes, hours, day of their life. Mm-hmm. So that was really my motivation when I was in law enforcement is the families. Just being able to give them a picture of what occurred, as well as if it was a prosecutable case, developing the evidence and putting together all the information to make sure that we have everything we need to be able to bring this person to justice.
So you're threshing out the facts to find out, was it just an accident or was there some negligence or something else involved?
Yeah, absolutely.
So like in a community that's not like ours, somewhere rural America, none of this stuff goes on?
To a degree. The challenge is it really depends on budgets and times, and that's a major restriction in this field. When you're talking about a small police department or a very small sheriff's office, oftentimes they don't have the resources to keep someone up on this topic. It's hundreds of hours of training, even just to understand the baseline information of how to reconstruct a traffic crash. So oftentimes they rely on larger agencies as, the local county or state police, and they're inundated just as much with their own cases and with everyone else's assists that sometimes things fall by the wayside. And it's a matter of priorities and really, do they have the resources to dig into it?
Mm-hmm. You started, before we were recording, we're talking about you also in our state of Illinois need to be a licensed private investigator. So are you going to grow a Magnum stash?
Yes, I tried that for
And those
a
shorts are too long.
no shave November one time, and I'm like, no, I'm definitely not going to go
Not
the mustache route.
Guy?
No, certainly. So Illinois requires to investigate the cause of any crashes. Typically, you think of private investigators as those that are sitting in their car and photographing, people, that are cheating on their wives or whatever the case, or serving papers, those types of things. Yeah,
dark glasses.
Yeah. So Illinois broadens it a bit more and basically says if you investigate the cause of crashes or incidents or fires or whatever the case, that you have to have a private investigator's license as well. And it just sort of adds to the credentials that are necessary to get into the business.
Okay. So you've done it enough that people across the country, is it just police departments or insurance agencies hiring you as well, or insurance carriers?
I do assist law enforcement, and typically I assist law enforcement in the capacity where if they don't have the resources or if they need some guidance, as I throw this offer out while I'm doing my instruction as well throughout the country. But I'll be a resource for them because I've been in that spot where just don't know where to go or don't know what to do next. So I pride myself in assisting law enforcement whenever possible.
So you could get a call from somebody you taught that said, "Hey, here's what I'm looking at. What the heck am I looking at?" Or
or proofing their reports, or just saying, okay, yeah, you're in the right direction, or here's a resource that I rely on, that type of thing. But mainly for the business, it's attorneys and insurance companies that are bringing me on and just really trying to understand the circumstances that led to the collision. Whether it's a matter of we just need to download a vehicle, we need to understand what data's in it, or we need a full court admissible reconstruction that allows us to give a picture to a judge and jury.
What does download a vehicle mean?
So, interesting topic. So, ever since, all the way from the 1994 Chevy Caprice, there were event data recorders in the vehicles.
Didn't know that. So, kind of like an airplane.
Very similar. Airplanes, so it's a little bit different. So, airplanes record constantly. They're recording voices and they're recording all the different diagnostics of the airplane. Event data recorders in vehicles are most often associated with the safety systems.
Okay.
So these safety systems were initially, the event data recorders are EDRs. In airbag systems were really sort of started as a cover your rear end by vehicle manufacturers. So it was newer technology. They're bringing airbags in vehicles, and they wanted to make sure if an airbag was supposed to deploy, did it. And also, okay, you had a crash where your airbag didn't deploy, it wasn't supposed to. Or vice versa, and say, okay, maybe we got it wrong, we need to refine our systems. Partially maybe because of litigation, also because of research. So law enforcement and consultants certainly saw this as, okay, this is data that's going to help us understand our crash. Mm-hmm. Vehicle manufacturers have access to this. How do we get access to it? And all the way back in 1994, it was the first commercially available event data recorders in vehicles where we could start to download data and understand, or image data, and understand more about our collision scene than we were able to get from the crush on the vehicles or the scene evidence. So in 2012, the Fed sort of standardized that and says if you have an EDR, you got to make it commercially accessible. So as of last year, I think 99% of vehicles sold had an event data recorder that commercially available software can image out of your vehicle and understand up to 5 seconds of pre-crash information, what you were doing, whether you're
so it's telling you speeds,
braking, throttle, sometimes steering wheel angle, sometimes whether or not your hands were on the steering wheel. There's a whole ton of information there.
Does each manufacturer have different inputs, or is there some standardization of like what has to be recorded?
Yeah, part of that Fed requirement required if you have an EDR, you have to record this information, record it this way.
Okay.
And then also said you don't have to record this information, but if you do, you have to record this way. And then some manufacturers just tack on even more information that they're looking at. Which it just depends on the manufacturer. Sometimes you get a whole lot more information. Sometimes you get some basic information. But either way, it's a much larger picture of the crash that we had without it.
And are the airbags deploying the thing that trips the trigger?
Oftentimes. So sometimes there's what's called a non-deployment event. So if a vehicle's involved in a collision and it's severe enough that the system wakes up and says, something's going on here, you might need my help. And it says, actually, you don't need my help. I'm going to go back to sleep without deploying airbags or seatbelt protectors and stuff.
But you see this in the system.
Yeah, it'll basically say, okay, we didn't deploy, but we're going to write some data just to keep it there.
Somebody swerved and whacked a huge pothole. Or...
Yeah, that's entirely possible. So just depending on the sensitivity of the recording, it may record something, go back to sleep without having done anything visible, but it's got some data there to say what actually happened here.
I see.
Yeah.
How often do you go look at that stuff and say, I didn't think that's what I was going to see? Ever?
Every now and then. Every now and then a case really surprises me. And it's not until, I've got a process that I developed to make sure that I'm turning over every stone in a case. And it's part of my report writing process. Every now and then you dig into that data and you start to understand, okay, things are a little bit different than they appear. Or maybe the police got it wrong, or maybe they didn't have a full understanding of what happened, or maybe they knew they had some questions there, but they didn't quite have it fleshed out. And oftentimes that data really sort of point in the direction of what occurred. The cool thing about it is now, you have two light vehicles that crash, two cars that crash. Maybe you have a much older vehicle that wasn't supported as a 2012, and you don't have any data in this one, right? But maybe that's your offending vehicle and you're trying to understand more about it. You can dig into the data in the second vehicle that's maybe got this detailed event data recorder, and using physics concepts, you can figure out how fast that guy was going, the unequipped vehicle, based off of the information that's in the equipped vehicle.
I see how much things are crushed, where bits are on the road, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, it really is.
Do you ever end up in situations where maybe like an investigator for a PD has his or her opinion and completely disagrees with you, and you're like, hey dude, like, check this out?
I came across situations where, yes, the police department got it wrong. The worst case scenario is where the PD got it wrong. Maybe they don't have the training or the know-how, and they make inferences or make leaps. I see that sometimes when I'm training throughout the country, and I'm constantly throwing the red flag out there saying, get more training, be careful with this. It's not as though, the way it reads. And the worst case scenario is when someone ends up getting prosecuted. A ticket is one thing. It's going to affect somebody's driver's record. But when someone ends up getting charged with the potential of prosecution, when they've got it wrong, that's part of my motivation for starting the company also, is just, certainly being from the law enforcement side of things, there's sometimes the us versus them mentality where, we're the police and we're going to prosecute the bad guys.
Sure.
Right? Or arrest and prosecute the bad guys. The thing is, if it were my family member, my wife, someone that I was close to that was involved in that crash, even if they were the defendant, I'd want an expert on their side that would understand this stuff and be able to dig into it with integrity to say, no, this is what actually occurred.
So if I was involved in an accident in anywhere USA, and I know what happened and I'm not at fault, but the police say I am, I could call you and say, hey, can you please come investigate this? Collision.
Certainly. So the challenge with working with private citizens, if you were involved, oftentimes I'd probably tell you to get an attorney, because the attorney is going to help us get access to the other person's vehicles, serve process, get everything in line to allow me to do my job.
By that I mean I could initiate contact and tell my team of legal experts, because I wouldn't just have one.
No, certainly, and that starts the ball rolling, saying, okay, how is this going to benefit the case? What information are we likely to get from this type of inspection or this type of investigation? And it really sort of gets the ball rolling.
Any idea how many fatals you've worked on?
It's been a lot.
Yeah.
Over 100, probably 150 or so.
How many motorcycle? Because you're also were a motorcycle copper too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how many motorcycle crashes?
A lot of motorcycle crashes.
Yeah.
Certainly with motorcycles being involved, it's much more likely to be a fatal crash, especially in Illinois with no helmet requirements. It was very common.
Yeah.
So many.
This is some of the stuff I wanted to share with the viewers, listeners, because the data helps people make decisions to not die. So just talk about that a little bit. Like, what are some of the of course, things like alcohol and drugs and being tired are all bad things to do when you're driving. But like, what are some of the, I'm sure there's common themes you see of bad decision making that leads to people dead or jacked up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when you really start digging into the numbers, I'm a numbers guy, just by the field I got into. Illinois for a while was publishing, how many fatalities happened this year on all their signboards, and it just kept
drive
ticking
down
up.
the freeway and you'd see it.
Yeah, and it's amazing how quickly that number climbs, and it's a staggering amount when you look nationwide. How many people are dying in crashes every single year? Not only dying, but then seriously getting injured, and there's a huge cost to society with the injuries and everything that comes along with traffic crashes. Now, that being said, there's strategies that certainly drivers can take on to make sure that they're being as safe as possible. Alcohol and tiredness are big ones, so long as you're being attentive on the roadway. Laws take a while to really sort of catch up to what's going on the roadways, and certainly we have a lot of distracted driving laws throughout the U.S. now, but distraction is a major issue. If your eyes aren't on the road, or you're distracted manually and mentally distracted, your response times go way up. And we'll see that in the data. We'll see that in the reconstruction, saying, okay, something's going on here.
Manually and mentally. So manually, I'm playing with the radio. I'm trying to get my cigarettes that fell on the floor. Yeah. I don't smoke, but yeah, I get that's what you're saying, right?
Absolutely. So there's been a lot of studies on these topics, certainly, and saying how much does me having a phone to my ear actually distract me? It's actually not that much. If your eyes are on the road and you're still attentive to the roadway. True, you're distracted, you're mentally somewhere else slightly, but it hasn't shown an appreciable change in the data in some of the studies that I've seen. There is a change, but not as significant. If it were the case where you are, taking your eyes off the road and trying to read a text or proof a text that you just drafted, and then also sort of punching on your phone. So manual and mental connection to a separate device really makes your times go way up. Basically, it comes down to perception response time.
Okay.
So if you're driving on the roadway and you don't expect that kid to come running out in front of you, or someone to pull off a side road, and it's that time that you burn trying to figure out what you should do, that really sort of gets you in trouble. Where if you're going 50 miles an hour, you're moving down the road 75 feet every second. You're covering a football field pretty quick, trying to figure out what to do before you even start getting the brakes or swerving. And having your mind tied up elsewhere is problematic.
Now you're burning up quarter second, thinking about, I didn't even realize I needed to do something, and now you got to compress all of that action into what probably becomes bad decisions.
Yeah.
Swerving to telephone poles and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I drive all over the country, and I can at any given time look in a car next to me, and people watch movies, and it's funny. I talk about it with our students in classes, because I say exactly what I'm saying now, and everybody's like, idiots. And then I go, and every one of you does it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and if you look me in the eye and tell me you don't, you're a liar. And everybody's like, yeah, you're right, but I'm good at it. Like, no, you're not.
Yeah. It's amazing. Everybody doesn't think it's going to happen to them, or everybody doesn't think, they're affected by it, until all of a sudden, you start looking at, you get in that situation, and your mind's elsewhere and everything else, and it becomes very challenging. So,
and that makes sense. Talking, like, you and I could drive down the road and have the same conversation. And we could be doing 100 miles an hour if it was legal to do so, and be fishtailing in the snow and doing whatever. But as soon as you start like taking your eyes to somewhere else, it's impossible to take in data. That's it to me is mind numbing how stupid really people are, that we're willing to like risk not only our safety but our stuff. Like, I got this nice car, I'm paying lots of money for it, I don't want to have to go buy another one and ruin my insurance and blah blah blah, like, just so I can play on the phone. Has there been a huge spike in traffic fatalities, or is it in the last 5-10 years with all the texting and all that crap?
It's hard to say, and I geek out on this stuff. I get pings to my phone whenever there's a new crash test video that's came out. Jump on YouTube and check it out. But really sort of digging into the data, it's challenging to differentiate what is a result of distraction, tiredness, alcohol consumption, drugs, and sort of need that out of the advances that are being made in traffic safety. So vehicles, if we were driving around in the vehicles that we had back in the 70s, we would have an unbelievable level of fatal crashes.
I didn't even think about that.
It first really sort of came to me when I was called to a crash one time, and I pull up and major impact. We got a crossroads. Somebody just made a stop sign and pulled out in front of a full-speed vehicle. This full-speed vehicle probably just barely had time to get on the brakes, and so they were probably hit between 45, 50 miles an hour in their door.
Driver's door?
In the driver's door. And I'm walking around trying to figure, okay, who's involved here? Who's the driver? Not in the driver's compartment. Ambulance isn't there yet. Trying to understand, and it's this woman just walking around, talking perfectly fine.
You beat everybody there?
Sometimes responding out in rural areas,
okay.
we'll beat the ambulance there.
Okay. You, as a sheriff's deputy, you showed up there. Okay.
Yeah. So, and just being able to, realize that this woman just took a shot in her driver's door at maybe 40 to 50 miles an hour, and she's perfectly fine out and talking, and she was in a smaller vehicle struck by an SUV. And just looking at that vehicle, and if it wasn't for the advances in safety systems and technology,
it's amazing.
She would have been in much worse condition.
What kind of car was it? Do you remember?
I don't recall. I remember it standing out in my mind, but I don't specifically remember what type of vehicle it was. But it had side impact airbags, it had curtain airbags, and it's amazing how many leaps technology starts to make. And now we have lane keeping assists and,
my truck
and adaptive
does that.
cruise
It's
control.
it took me a while to get, because I'd be trying to change lanes, and it would be like, no, stay here. I actually shut it off for a long time because it was annoying.
Yeah. You talk about, even just the advances that I've seen in the last 15 years, the stability control. You don't really think about that, but for a vehicle to kill power and monitor speeds on each wheel and make sure that you're staying straight on your roadway.
Yeah.
We had numerous crashes when I started with the sheriff's office because people were
just
hitting the gas, getting loose,
slipping
back
in the
ends
water
coming
or
around.
ice.
Yeah, and taking shots in their doors. And the best case scenario is you take an impact from the front. As soon as things start going onto the sides, it's just, it's not designed. Much more challenging to take a high-speed collision from the side versus the front. So,
Yeah, you got the seat behind you, you've got the airbag in front of you, you got restraints if you're using them.
Yeah.
Are seatbelts necessary?
100%. 100%. So
when people say oh, I knew a guy that the seatbelt killed him, or if it wasn't for the seatbelt, he'd have lived, or I knew a friend that had a head-on collision at 60 as kids into a telephone pole. They were in a little Golf, Volkswagen Golf.
Yeah.
Two up front, two in the middle, and then there was two in the hatchback, kids making out back there. And they go into the telephone pole, the passenger up front ejected through the windshield, the kid in the back seat through the windshield. They all lived, but the two up front both had broken clavicles and punctured lungs from seat belts, and there was probably no airbags, or maybe, and this was 90, 91. So
yeah,
who knows what.
Yeah, I say 100%. If you're, as a driving strategy, if you're trying to maximize the potential that you're going to make it home, seatbelts are the best option. And then everything else that's going on inside your vehicle, certainly. The challenge is, there's just from what I've seen, right?
Yeah,
so the challenge is always going to be, I'm always going to come across somebody, especially when I was working with the sheriff's office, that somebody's going to have a story. Well, I knew this guy that survived this crash because he was ejected in his vehicle, rolled off and burst into flames, right? So, those are extremely unlikely scenarios. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So the thing is, airbags, all that other stuff is considered supplemental restraint systems. It doesn't do you any good if you're not where you're supposed to be, which is in your seat, restrained and everything else. And there's a ton of technology with seatbelts. Your seatbelt will actually deploy a pyrotechnic charge in the coil, or in the retractor, or in the buckle, and it'll actually cinch you back into your seat before your airbag goes off.
This is microsecond stuff.
Yeah, milliseconds.
That's
really
cool.
quick. Really quick. 20 milliseconds, a 20th of a second before the crash happens.
That's cool.
Or following the crash occurring.
Yeah. You hear these anecdotal stories about people saying these things, or the airbag if it wasn't for the airbag, this or that would have happened or didn't happen. Challenge some of that, because it's interesting, even with all the data, that people just like to push back from that stuff.
Yeah, certainly. And there will always be situations. It's technology, and there's challenges with technology. And I'm not on the engineering side of figuring out how does this best fit a driver, when shouldn't or shouldn't it deploy. If you're sitting too close to the steering wheel, that's a risk, because you're going to get an airbag at extremely high speed into your face.
So maybe you should actually read your owner's manual and figure that stuff out in your car.
Yeah, certainly. That certainly helps. It's as good as the technology pushes it, but really it's just based on data. What is the best case scenario to make drivers as safe as possible, but it's not going to work in every situation. There's even pedestrian airbags that are popular in Europe. We're starting to see a little bit of it in the U.S., where they'll deploy on the outside. If you're about to hit a pedestrian,
versus using sensors, radar or something.
Yes, yeah, your hood will raise up slightly because the pedestrians are going to come into your hood, and that way it's not. The pedestrian's not hitting down on the engine. Wow. Your hood will raise, and airbags will deploy on the base of your windshield, and the top edge is your friend, of the really sharp stuff that would
sci-fi stuff.
Severely injure a pedestrian. I joke around in the classes, like, well, I can tell from out in our area, we're going to be saving a lot of deer. Deer are going to be running away from our crashes, and our car will be totaled with airbags going off everywhere. And
that'd be expensive.
Yeah, definitely.
That's kind of funny. So nobody in the U.S. is making that stuff yet?
I have yet to see it. I don't believe it's made its way over here quite yet. On the high-end luxury vehicles, maybe on a couple, but it's more popular in Europe right now.
Did you ever go on a motorcycle crash where the rider had on one of the jackets that inflates? I've seen them on YouTube and stuff. I've never seen one in real life.
Yeah, same. I've seen it on YouTube. I have yet to come across it, but it's a really interesting concept. And it's, you see them I've seen them for fitting them onto elderly people falling and motorcyclists falling off their motorcycle. It's interesting technology, and really it's just a matter of how do you try and address the unexpected. And it comes down to what the driver can do. Are they wearing their helmet? I was a motorcycle rider since very early on in my driving career, even before I got on with as a motor officer. And there were times I didn't wear my helmet. It's just, you're dealing with a hot day, you don't want to wear a helmet. But most often, motorcycle crashes become so much more severe because you got this big head on top of your shoulders, and it's hard to keep that thing from hitting hard objects when you're a ragdoll going
flying
through a crash.
Through the air.
Yeah.
It's a huge risk. Huge. Every fireman I know in the area, it seems like, if you just ask them, tell me some motorcycle stories, and it's like one after the other, no helmet, dead person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the tragic part of it is when you have a crash involving a motorcycle where you don't have a helmet, where it could have been more of a minor collision or minor injury, now you have someone with a traumatic brain injury. And that's life-changing, not only for them but for their families, and it trickles down, and it's tragic to see.
It's got to be pretty often, but how often are you guys seeing, or have you been seeing, the motorcyclist hit because the motorist didn't see them or wasn't aware of them? And how do you deal with that?
It's challenging. Certainly, being a motorcycle rider, it's challenging seeing those types of things. But it's unfortunately all too common, unless the motorcycle is really doing something egregious. Oftentimes at the sheriff's office, we'd see vehicles being at fault more often than the motorcyclist was. That's certainly not always the case, but visibility is an issue. When you're looking at just a single headlight coming down the roadway, especially at nighttime, how easy is it to pick that out from the background? Do you know how fast it's coming at you? There's challenges, and there's a lot of studies that go along with that to understand what's the best lighting configuration on my motorcycle that will help maximize the potential that I'm going to be seen. Really, one study that we drew from and changed the lighting on our motorcycles at the sheriff's office suggested and strongly supported that rather than a single headlamp, if you're just looking at a single headlamp going down the road, it's hard to figure out is it moving at me? How fast is it moving at me?
Yeah, I've noticed that.
So actually, a triangle of light, having lamps mounted to basically the sides of your fenders on a motorcycle, or basically at axle level. So you have not only the headlight, but then you also have two side lights.
Okay.
That really sort of gives the driver enough perspective to start more readily identifying whether or not that motorcycle is, its speed, its direction, and its proximity to how close they are to the oncoming driver.
Okay. That's interesting. And it's kind of interesting that the manufacturers don't do more stuff with that.
Yeah, that is interesting.
I mean, it's kind of important. That's a whole nother discussion in itself.
Yeah.
I know what kind of car you drive or your family drives. Vehicles that, like you say, man, I'd never buy one of those, or you're not allowed to talk about that stuff. Or like, that's a pretty good car, statistically speaking, in crashes. Like, do you see certain makes do better?
Really what I rely on, when we just bought a vehicle recently, I really rely on IIHS.
What's that mean?
Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. And basically this is a nonpartisan conglomerate that crash tests vehicles. They rate vehicles manufacturer wide, and basically they say, okay, how safe is this vehicle? They really sort of push the envelope from vehicle manufacturers to up their game. Narrow impacts,
What's a narrow impact?
The deadliest crash oftentimes and most common crash for severe injuries or death is a narrow impact. So if you're driving on the roadway and an oncoming vehicle crosses over and just barely hits you in the corner, right? So like a 25-30% overlap, right?
Okay.
Not a head-on, not even half overlap, but just sort of narrow overlap. It's really difficult for a vehicle manufacturer to anticipate that, to be able to address that, right? Because you have two vehicles going at high speed corner to corner.
So you've got tons of energy just barely hitting it. It's not being absorbed by the totality of the vehicle.
Yeah, and coming right in on that driver, right? Mm-hmm. So IIHS, by my understanding, really sort of pushed the envelope. They saw in the data that this is a problem. And so they started testing more and more vehicles with that narrow impact crash test. And many of the manufacturers failed out. They weren't passing the test, and that was just the nature of the engineering at that time. And it really sort of upped their game to say, okay, how do we address this? And that's the direction things went, and cars became safer from it. And actually, I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was either Toyota or Honda actually featured a narrow impact crashed vehicle at the Chicago Auto Show.
I remember that.
Yeah, and they pride themselves on safety, and some manufacturers do it more than others. And getting back to your question, which vehicle do I prefer or not prefer? Looking at safety features, certainly we want all the buttons and the gadgets inside the vehicle when we're looking at purchasing a new vehicle. Really, I'm putting my wife and kids in this vehicle and sending them off to wherever they're going. I look at safety features, and that's just sort of the direction I
do
go.
That.
So IIHS, and the challenge is what is standard versus what is not. Many manufacturers require it to be, upgrade or on higher end, but a lot of manufacturers.
About safety features.
Safety features. A lot of manufacturers are now, making it standard. A lot of stuff is coming standard, which is good to see.
I know I've looked at trucks before. I drive a Ford, and I've looked at, I don't want to say the manufacturer because I don't want to offend some of you that buy crap trucks, but one of them, like the one thing I read over and over again, was drivers get their feet cut off in certain collisions. I'm like, well, I kind of like my feet, so I'm not buying that truck. Yeah, like I saw that over and over in the safety ratings. Like it did good in everything else, but drivers get their feet cut off. I'm like, I'm good with not.
Minor detail. Minor detail.
Yeah.
No, and I and I'm, like I said, I geek out about this stuff. So I'm browsing the crash test videos and ratings and stuff. So I look up the squad that I was currently driving. Mm-hmm. It was a pickup truck, and I won't go into manufacturers.
Truck. Yeah.
I won't go into specific manufacturers, and I send the videos to our garage manager and say, hey, this is a problem. You drive a lot of miles.
Let's weld up some steel around this thing. Same truck.
It makes you, it really makes you think about how you're driving, the risks you take when you understand, am I going to be able to come out of this if I, move 5 feet left or right?
It's a very interesting thing that we humans, I talk about it with our students when we're training with firearms, what we get comfortable with. And like, you've been around somebody that's never drove a motorcycle or never shot a gun or drove a car, and you're really like, scared and nervous. And then all of a sudden, fast forward, the person's comfortable with the gun or driving the car or the motorcycle. But then you reach a point where if you input wrong skills, like texting or anything else, or you're just not a good driver, or you're not a safe gun handler, or whatever the thing is, you're comfortable, but you shouldn't be.
Yes.
And you see people like Sharon and I were in, I think we were in Oregon a few weeks ago driving, and I had to detour. It was hours of detour. We're on a 2-lane. We were 2-laning across Oregon, and it's horrible. We just came up on the crash as state police had got there. They passed us on this 2-lane doing 100, and it took me 15 minutes to catch him. It was like an older, the small motorhome that's like the dually rear end and van front end. I don't know what class that is. That vehicle, somebody crossed the center line and hit them head on, and that whole thing came in pieces, and both the people were dead. But just thinking about it, like that family, husband and wife, I don't know who they were or anything about them. They're probably on vacation, enjoying life, looking at the mountains, and just somebody just bent over or did whatever and head on them at 60, 70 miles an hour. But it's like, and you think about it, like I thought about it later, like, had I been paying attention and I was that driver, what are you really going to do with that car? You're not going to, maybe you get to swerve one way or another, but other than that, at that moment.
Yeah, the challenge is you don't know how you're going to react until you're in that situation. And how do you really prepare for something like that? Really, in looking at human factors, which is something I've trained quite a bit in, understanding how drivers typically react, your options are pretty much brake or swerve. Oftentimes, unless you're changing what you're doing leading up to that, alcohol, tiredness, distraction, those are all options leading up to, okay, how am I going to address this hazard? Really, when you're in that moment, there's oftentimes not a lot of options. That being said, there's certain things that can give you an advantage, and that's the way you drive to begin with, to make sure that you're going to be aware of it as early as possible to maybe give you the best chance. But when you're 0.9 seconds away from impact, there's only so much you can do. Yeah.
I have become hyper aware in my life. I think 4 times somebody's hit me while I've been stopped. Rear-ended twice, front end one time. Guy ran a red light in the snow, and I don't know if he ran it, he slid through it and spun out of control and whacked me. And somebody one time was going to rear end me on 90, and I look in the mirror and I had left space. I pulled onto the shoulder and they blasted by me and hit the person in front of me.
Man.
But I kind of felt bad, but
that's that's attention to your surroundings. That's that comes down to everything that you teach.
Point now, Sharon hates it when we're driving, but I'll like see something and I'll whack the brakes, not like freaking out, like somebody passing on like a 2-lane, and you're like, that guy ain't gonna make it. And I know there's 2 cars in front of me, and I don't know what they're gonna do, so I'll just like start slowing down to have more time. And you see the craziest stuff, man. I don't trust anybody. I don't trust you. I don't trust Drew. I don't trust that dog driving.
I think it was my dad when it was first teaching me to drive, and he talked about when you're driving, you're not only driving your own vehicle, you're driving everybody else's vehicle, and you can anticipate where they're going to be, and that's not always possible. Drivers do unexpected things, and there's no way to always anticipate what other drivers are going to do. But certainly, defensive driving is eventually it would catch up with you if you're not driving defensively. And it's just the nature of as many miles as we put on.
It's you said sad how many people get in these wrecks and accidents every year. I'm amazed that there's not a freaking car wreck every 5 minutes. I mean, maybe there is in America, but just the fact I can drive to the next town and back, and you look at everybody on their phone and all the stupid stuff people are doing. I can't imagine. I can't believe there's not a whole lot more smoldering piles of cars everywhere.
Really. And we're looking at some crashes. It's amazing how much tenths of a second can make. And when you're in law enforcement and you're in the thick of it and you're dealing with fatal crashes week after week, it can be difficult to deal with. But we look at it sometimes as, the difference between a tenth of a second here or a tenth of a second there between a minor injury crash and a fatal crash. If somebody's going to blow a stop sign, I've seen people. I had somebody early on in my career where I'm driving on a country road at 60 miles an hour, 55 miles an hour, and somebody blows a stop sign crossing over in front of me, and I'm 10 feet from them. And if I had been a half a second ahead of where I was at, we'd have gotten in the door, and it'd be very different. I probably wouldn't be having a conversation with
right.
But it's amazing how minor little changes can make a big difference across the board.
And that's the whole distracted driver thing. I know people get annoyed. I got a ticket when the laws first changed here in Illinois. I wasn't texting. I was on my phone. And I think it was like when it first happened, when it first became law. But that right there, like, well, I'm not distracted. I was just dialing to make the call. Yeah, but for the tenth of a second, your eyes were down here. Yeah. And then kid runs out in the road or whatever the thing is, situation. That's like that old commercial of the ball and the Michelin or whoever break a tire commercial, right? Is there factors you see in maintenance that have a lot of weight in crashes?
Not so much with light vehicle, passenger vehicle, light trucks. I deal with a fair amount of commercial vehicle collisions. And when you start getting into vehicles that are traveling millions of miles, you start to see issues where companies make it a priority to make sure that their vehicles are in good working order. It pays dividends down the line. But when companies are, it all comes down to the bottom line sometimes, where they're choosing risking safety, to not have to repair a vehicle. It can certainly cause issues, and oftentimes the issue becomes braking systems, lighting systems, safety systems, loading, load securement. There's a lot of issues that can start to bleed into that issue.
That load securing is scary. I don't know how many times I've seen crap come off of trucks, and you've probably seen people dead because of it.
It can more so the big way that crashes can be, the outcomes can be modified is when you have braking systems that are functioning properly or those that are not. The state police in Illinois do a great job of enforcing commercial vehicle laws, but there's no way to catch everybody and always address it for all those that are really trying to skirt the issue. But unfortunately, if it catches up with them in a traffic crash, that's exactly what we do. We go in and we forensically inspect that truck to understand what's really going on here and what condition was it prior to the crash, and was it or wasn't it a contributing factor. A truck sitting at a stoplight and somebody runs into them, clearly if they had a horrible braking system, it really doesn't make a difference. But if that could have made a difference by them being able to stop in time or be able to react properly, it's certainly something we dig into.
It's one of those things like, as a carpenter for years, it was annoying to deal with building inspectors and like, that guy doesn't even know what he's talking about. He was never a tradesman. Or like truck drivers, man, I got to go through all this bullshit, appeasing the state, I got a friend that their whole job is doing safety inspections, and they, go through the truck, slap a sticker on it, or tell the people, well, you got to fix X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And truck drivers probably hate that. It's this, this fee and time waste. But I think people don't understand, if it wasn't for building codes and these types of things, like it only existed, some lawmaker said enough's enough, like houses are burning down, or these trucks are running over school buses.
No, time is money, and there will always be companies that do it because it's the right thing to do, where they maintain their vehicles properly, they keep them safely operating, and they will just because, not because of the risk of they're going to get inspected or not get their sticker, whatever the case. But other companies will certainly push the envelope. If it wasn't perhaps for enforcement, if it wasn't perhaps for consequences down the road, they may be less likely to go that direction.
You got a favorite tire brand?
I really don't.
No? Do you use snow tires?
No, I don't switch. I don't switch back and forth.
I don't either.
It just sort of depends on your vehicle, but I'm a family guy. I make sure my vehicles are maintained to as top notch as possible, but it can be challenging. You're dealing with if you're a family where you're dealing with, putting food on the table versus keeping your vehicle maintained, it can, things can start going by the wayside. And I've seen that too, where who's more likely to come out of a crash, an older, vehicle that's not maintained as well versus a newer high-end vehicle that's got safety systems. That person's going to be in a whole lot better condition in a head-on. And I've seen that exact example. It's just a matter of, weighing the possibilities.
Mm-hmm. Is it true that drunk people come away from crashes because they flop around in the car and they don't stiffen themselves?
That's a very interesting question, and that's oftentimes, it's hard to say, right?
You've heard this 1,000 times.
Yeah, I've heard it 1,000 times, and I want to say that I've seen it, or I've probably even said it at some point. Oh, well, he's more likely to come out of it because of that. I have yet to see a study on it that really shows that, and that's really sort of what I rely on. But it's odd. You've heard exactly that. It's odd seeing some of the crashes that intoxicated persons can go through, and they're up walking around on the scene or stumbling around on the scene. Mm-hmm. It's amazing.
Maybe they're just too drunk to know they're hurt.
Yeah, or know that they were in a crash.
Yeah, right, right. So nowadays you spend your time on the road, right? You travel the whole country and Canada.
Yeah. I've been traveling quite a bit. So I teach for the Northwestern Center for Public Safety. I teach crash investigation.
Is that
and
attached to the University, Northwestern?
Yes, it is. It's sort of a subset of Northwestern, where they specialize in police-specific training. It was originally the Traffic Institute. They wanted to branch out into some other training, forensics, evidence collection, crash investigation, reconstruction, as well as police management. And I'm part of the traffic safety portion of it, where I actually just got back from Louisiana about I think it was on Friday I got back. Teach the whole week and then right back into working on cases.
Okay, cool. When you go to Canada, how do their laws differ from ours with all this stuff?
It's really sort of along the same lines, and in Canada, I was instructing law enforcement, so they were more so looking at compliance and not necessarily the civil side. Because when you get into the civil side, it's very different compared to criminal law. Mm-hmm. Really, they're looking at it just the way we are, where they're trying to understand the evidence, understand the forensics, understand the digital evidence, the downloads, and just trying to get the best picture that they can to understand the circumstances that led to it. Really, it's just a matter of how are their statutes written, and they can apply that specific to their cases.
I gotcha. So years of doing this, teaching now for a prestigious university, Professor Thomas. That's really cool. Totality of all of your knowledge on the subject, if you could condense it down to like a sheet of paper to stuff that, because of course it's only useful if you can put it all on a sheet of paper. But like just some key points for people, like I hope I never need your services, but how does somebody go about life and end up not needing your services? Like what are some takeaways you've learned from all of this?
Certainly. Where there's really no way to completely avoid every collision that you may become involved with, and we can see that in the data as far as this was an unavoidable crash versus this is sort of the driver could have done something a little bit different. Just really what we talked about is think about your driving strategy. Are you driving defensively to make sure that you have an out, obeying the speed limit, being aware of those around you, wearing your safety belt, keeping your vehicle in good working order? Really, this is sort of the bullet points that you probably hear from state agencies and messages and ad campaigns and all that kind of stuff. But where the rubber really meets the road, it gives you the best. It gives you the best chance of being able to come out of whatever scenario you're dealing with in the best. Be able to make it home.
High speed, so we've got speed limits. I hate speed limits. I love traveling west because speed limits go way up, right?
Yeah.
Like how much worse is crashes when you start to get like 70, 80, 90?
Exponential.
Yeah.
Exponential, really. Because, physics doesn't go away when you start just talking about, this was a vehicle involved or we got higher speed limits. As soon as you start doubling your speed, your stopping distance goes so much higher. The distance you're traveling, trying to figure out what you should do, approaching a hazardous situation goes way up. And really just the amount of the amount of damage that's gonna come into your car and onto you when you start traveling at higher and higher speeds, it just goes way up, and it greatly decreases the possibility of you being able to come out of it.
I think people they think that legislators just don't like people getting places on time, but yeah, it's crazy when you see a high-speed crash, what it does to the vehicle. How about stuff in the car? First accident I ever came on as a teenager, lady had a box of mason jars I'm assuming they were in the back seat. They were all over the car, broken. Most of them broke on her head. Like, how often do you see stuff like that? And just, to comment on that.
So that's an interesting concept. If you have a head-on crash, how many, as your listeners and viewers think about it, how many of you insist on the person behind you buckling up? You probably don't even think about that. Okay, I'm gonna follow what Andrew said and I'm gonna buckle up. But if that person behind you is not buckled up, you're gonna stay right where you should be. But guess what? Guess where they're going?
That pile of meat's coming at you.
They're coming right in behind you. 200 pounds right in the back of your seat. Then is gonna severely injure you because now you're stuck to where your seatbelt's at. So I'm not advocating for nobody wearing their seatbelts, but if you can keep not only other persons, your cargo, all that kind of stuff, where it's supposed to be. That's, like I said, it's not going to come in on you. It's going to help you be able to use your safety systems to the best possibility.
Do you have like a mental checklist before you go on a road trip or go on a drive, or are you just conditioned? Like, if you were to give somebody a mental checklist or a checklist, what would it be?
Really, if we're crossing country, I mean, think about. We just crossed country and we ended up having one of those hitches, the hitch trays.
With all the junk on it.
Yeah, because we're loading a bunch of kids in and a bunch of stuff and everything else. And it's just a matter of, okay, if things were to go sideways, if things were to go worst case scenario, how do we deal with it? I literally threw a high visibility vest in my car. If I gotta go change a tire, that's worst case scenario when you're standing off on the side of an interstate.
Did it outside Nashville. Rush hour on the inside, blew one of my trailer tires.
Oh.
Yep.
That's horrible.
It sucked. Right after the S12 event. Did I tell you about that one?
No.
Yeah, it sucked.
Yeah, because as soon as you think about it, one, if you combine not only that, but then you combine nighttime, it's a bad scenario because people don't expect somebody to be off the side of the road or close to the side of the road, and think about how long you're in view. Depending how far they're following the person in front of them, you might have not any amount of time to be able to get out of your way. So just think about worst case scenarios. And sometimes my wife says because of my field, I dwell in it a little too often. But very simply, just thinking about how am I going to deal with this if we're stranded on the side of the road, do we have an ability to change a tire? Do you know how to change a tire? Or do you have AAA you can call or some other road service? Really, it's just a matter of just being careful and caring about not only yourself, but then the person that's driving next to you. Are you being careful for yourself? But then
I think that's the interesting thing, though. Without knowledge of what careful is, like, I'm not a great swimmer. I am, but if somebody's like, I'm not a great swimmer, so me being careful is I just, stay like 10 feet away from the water. Well, that's great till you're like crossing a bridge and the bridge collapses, or something outside of, like, so careful to some people is, I'm just not going to text as much, or AAA is great. I just talked to somebody the other day that had a brand new car and they've got like roadside assistance, and they literally were told, and they were in a major metropolitan area, there's nobody that we can send. So they just had to sit there for they couldn't get their spare down, because the lock was froze up. That's something people need to check more often.
Yes.
Every time I get an oil change, I go out onto the floor at my friend's shop, and I always take a look and I make sure the tires got air in it.
Yeah, I dealt with the exact same thing not too long ago. Thankfully, I was in a gas station parking lot. Not
froze up.
Here. Yep, froze up. Hadn't probably been dropped in 10 years. Yeah, no, I know that. So it's challenging because you can't necessarily anticipate every scenario. But on the same token, it's just a matter of how do I keep my vehicle in good working order? How do I give myself the best chance, in a situation? And really, you talk about, well, I'm not going to text as much. Everybody's dealt with, okay, if you ever dealt with a Bluetooth device, like a speaker or an ear set or something, you're telling Siri what you're trying to tell it, and they're calling somebody they're not supposed to, or it just doesn't work well. But advances in cellular technology, Bluetooth technology, really that stuff has came a long way. So if you can get your eyes back on the road, hands on the wheel, rather than on your cell phone or doing texting, Bluetooth is a huge advantage. If you can get used to it and understand how your limitations, one, but then also if you got to call somebody, just being able to get that call placed
or just drive because you're driving.
That's a good point.
Like I joke with people all the time, like you wouldn't sit and start chopping, like hey, I'm julienning some carrots and I'm whacking away, and all of a sudden just try to like start texting with your free finger. You wouldn't do it, right?
Yep.
Or you wouldn't be like in your electric panel and decide I'm going to look over here and read an email while your hands are in your, we trust ourselves in this extremely dangerous task.
Yeah.
It's just weird. I'm going to clean my gutters, up on the ladder, hang Christmas lights, and send a text. You wouldn't do it.
And meanwhile, you're in a 3,000 to 4,000 pound vehicle going down the roadway.
Yeah.
And your eyes are completely off the road.
It's dumb.
Yeah, it's but we can't necessarily engineer our way out of this. Oftentimes the manufacturers say, this is going to help save lives, and yes, the motivation is good, but until drivers start understanding that, we got to center ourselves and understand what we're doing here. There's never going to be enough safety systems on a vehicle
just like a gun,
prevent someone from doing what they shouldn't have been doing in the first place.
Yeah.
So and the impact of that certainly is different in all scenarios. If you're sitting at a stoplight and on your phone, that's not certainly as risky as going down an interstate at 80 and texting on your phone. That being said, how do legislatures legislate? How do engineers try and address it? There's no silver bullet, but maybe drivers need to look at themselves as opposed to saying the safety system's going to
what's my goal here?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about business. So not so much about like what your business is. We will cover that before we go, but most of the people that we have on this show in some way, shape, or form are self-made people. So you were sergeant at your sheriff's office, but started your business in 17 and were able to juggle both, and now you're full-time doing your own thing, which is great. Talk a little bit about like your philosophy of business development and entrepreneurship, because that's what you are.
Certainly.
Right.
So I started at the local sheriff's office in 2006, and really crashes became my passion soon after. I started investigating crashes certainly right away.
Passionate about calamity. Nice.
And it's amazing. Like you get on the scenes, and some officers just say, "No way, don't want to deal with it. Call somebody else out here." And me and I had a lot of others on the team that were passionate about it. Just finding the answers, figuring out the puzzle, understanding more about it. That was 06, started on the team in 07, and it just sort of took off from there. So I started teaching at Northwestern in 2016.
I didn't know that.
And then started the business up in 2017. My motivation with starting the business was that I couldn't see myself pushing a squad car until I was 50, right? I started in law enforcement when I was 20. 30 years in law enforcement, my hat's off to those that can do it and come out sane on the other side of it. It is a extremely challenging profession, no matter where you're working, whether you're working in a suburb, whether you're working in a city, whether you're working, in a rural county. The stuff law enforcement sees on a daily, weekly basis is worse than many will see in their lifetime.
Comment on that, just because I think something, even as a young man, I thought would think about like, the cops out here, what are they, a couple drunk drivers, and these guys are complaining about but just comment on that.
The challenge with, and I'm not making excuses, there's no reason for law enforcement to not treat citizens with respect and with restraint and with integrity. The challenge, though, is these officers are perhaps coming from a call where they just dealt with a drowning child and taking that report and consoling that family, and then they go dealing with a barking dog complaint or an alarm or whatever the case. It comes in all directions, and then the very next person they may deal with might not understand why that officer's not necessarily addressing their concerns in the way that they maybe want. Mm-hmm. It's challenging. It's challenging, and not only you see that for, early on you're excited to get into it and get your feet wet, and it wears on officers. And mental health is certainly an issue in law enforcement.
Physical health too.
Certainly.
All that adrenaline and cortisone's horrible.
Certainly, and it goes hand in hand. And not only are you dealing with difficult situations, but then you're also dealing with shift work. Working midnights, there's nothing natural about having to work a midnight shift. Anybody that has for any extended period of time, it wears on you. It really wears on your mental health, your physical health, and then also you're working weekends away from your family. It's challenging. And I did 15 years of it. I'm fortunate enough to be able to jump into something different. But there's people that do it for 20, 30 years. Mm-hmm. And it's no wonder why they come out a bit jaded about what they've seen. And sometimes, mental health and physical health suffers, certainly. And everything that cascades along with that between, their life expectancy, their family health, and their family unit.
Mm-hmm. Back to the business side of it.
Yeah. So jumping into collision analytics in 2017, my motivation was, I'm going to have something to do when I jump out at about 20-year mark, right? That's sort of the magic number for pension wise. I made it to 15 years. I had an opportunity where the business was snowballing enough that I was really able to jump into it and say, it wasn't fair to my family for me to be keeping so many plates in the air. And really that was my motivation, was to jump into this field that I'm passionate about.
What, looking back 5 years, what'd you do right? What'd you do wrong? I don't mean like, one time I yelled at my wife. I don't mean like that. I mean in the development of your business.
Yeah, really counsel of many. I talked to as many people in the industry as I could that would talk to me and give me guidance and give me the take on how they got started, the benefits and drawbacks when they were getting started, or even in their current status of their business, and just understanding as much about it as you can before you jump into it. Mm-hmm. And really just hour upon hour doing research and doing marketing and doing, just pushing it in the direction that you start to see some milestones met.
What did you do that if you look back, you wouldn't have done? Something you would have changed?
Not that I can necessarily think of.
You did everything perfect?
No.
You did everything perfect?
No, and basically, as I was building the business, my wife and I don't believe in debt. We have no debt other than the home, right? So we were gonna build the business with as little overhead as we could. So every bit of income that we had with the business, we're sinking it directly back into the business and investments in software and technology and everything else. And you make hiccups with, was this the best purchase or whatever the case, and is this paying dividends? There's no way to know at the time other than just making sure that you're doing your research and trying to figure out how is this going to pay off. And there were certainly things along the way where, okay, I wouldn't have bought this software, I would have gone with this instead, which I ended up having to go with anyway. Really, my wife has a philosophy, because I'm a very frugal person, where she'll say, I oftentimes will have buyer's remorse even before I put it on the purchase belt, right? Okay. And she'll be the one there right next to me, like, don't get that crap tool. Get this one. Go buy
the better one.
Yep. Yeah. Don't go to this value store.
Yeah.
Go to this store and get this tool, because it's going to last longer and it's going to work better. So
I like that.
Just think about longevity. What direction are you taking things, and how's it going to pay off in the long run?
Did you have any friends, coworkers, family, like, I can't believe you're doing this. You got a family, man. You got a good job. You got a good pension. What are you doing? What are you thinking about?
There were some that were very skeptical. They know I'm a very measured and thoughtful person, and I do most everything very deliberately. Mm-hmm. And they know that this wasn't a flash in the pan. Hey, Andrew's off on some other project.
Right. It's just like when he took jazz tap lessons.
Yeah, right.
Do you remember that when you were doing the tap dancing lessons?
Very, very long time ago. Yeah. So that was for a show. That was for a show. No. So, no, it's just a matter of, I definitely had counsel of many. Am I being blind to something because I want this more, or because I want to move in this direction? And really just a matter of not going on my own, bouncing ideas off of others, just understanding, okay, is this the right move?
Is
and weighing all the options and numbers and everything
industry?
Else.
Is there a lot of people that do what specifically you do?
There are a fair amount, but really when you start getting into the industry, you start knowing everybody pretty quick.
Okay.
So, there's certainly people that jump in and jump out that do maybe other things as well. But when you start jumping into the industry of crash reconstruction, where you're looking at the people that only do that, there's not a lot of people out there.
I got it. I appreciate you coming, sharing some of your experience and know-how. If the folks listening never meet you, never see you again, what would you leave them with? If you said, man, how would these people, feel about me if all I get is to say this? What would you say?
Really, I appreciate the opportunity for coming to talk with you. This is a very interesting, great format to be able to get some discuss some very interesting topics. And my wife says, you're never, you talk about a topic and you're never going to be as passionate about it with the person that you're talking with, other than, if that's your specialty.
Sure.
You're the one that's most passionate about it. That being said, hopefully I never meet any of your listeners on a case, or if they're involved in a case, but they're more than welcome to call me and bounce ideas off me if they're dealing with something. That being said, the best way to not have to call me is the topics that we talked about, just making sure that you and your family are staying safe on the road in whatever manner possible, staying sober, staying, well slept, not driving tired, staying off your devices, and just being all around as careful as you can. But all in all, there's no way to avoid every situation. So when you do, you make the most of it, and just draw from counsel when you're going forward. If you are involved in a crash, make sure that you and your family are safe, and just start the process, unfortunately.
How do people find you?
I have a website, www.collisionanalyticsllc.com.
Collisionanalyticsllc.com.
Yeah, and basically I'm a Reconstructionist in the Chicagoland area, so you can find me online. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn. You can look up the Collision Analytics site.
If an agency wants to hire you, they can find you there as well.
Yeah, certainly.
Cool.
Certainly.
I hope you guys enjoyed the discussion. I thought it would be cool to talk with somebody that specializes in what Andrew does. Some food for thought, because the concepts that we talk about here don't just pertain to bad guys. In fact, most of the bad shit that happens to us is your fault or mine, because we do stuff to ourselves. So pay attention. Don't be a dickhead, and drive like a good person. Hey man, everybody that comes in signs that. You can throw the date on there. It's the 20, you could stand up and push your chair, 21st of July.
All right.
You can even write your business name on there.
All right, throw it over here.
For those of you that watch today, if you enjoyed the show, share it. If you do work for an agency or an insurance company, or maybe even you could get Andrew to come out and do a speaking engagement for you, hit him up. Drew will put a link in the description, and we'll see you guys again soon. Thanks, Drew. Visit our website, carrytrainer.com, for information about classes held throughout the U.S., Carry Trainer apparel, and upcoming projects. You can also email us at training@carrytrainer.com for information about setting up your own private course or speaking engagement. Training@carrytrainer.com or carrytrainer.com. Hey, little brother, what do you think of gunfighter gun oil?
I'm gonna have to show you.
Hey, Steve, what do you think of gunfighter gun oil?
Well, Mick,
Hey, Steve, what do you think of gunfighter gun oil?
well, Mick, I have to show you about that. Gunfighter lube. Baby, I had the gunfighter blues. But then I got me some gunfighter lube. Let me tell you about it. Made in the USA. Amazing lubricity. Amazing adhesion, baby. 100% synthetic. but it's gonna last you. Gunfighter, gunfighter, gun old baby, took away my gunfighter blues. I'm still working on it, but
So you like the lube?
it's the best.